Well, this today is the last, and those people who've been here for the first time, the last in a series that I've been doing on the subject of creating space. We did a series in the summer on harmony, and I never know where these series is going to go. And we ended up, how do you actually create harmony? And we ended up in the idea that the way that you create harmony in your life and in the world is you create space for it to happen. And so I thought, well, I better do a series on creating space because that's what we're supposed to be doing. So I've done 7 weeks. Now, if you missed the previous one, if you look at the red card on the chair in front of you, that tells you how to get the previous ones. So you can either get them on the podcast where you just get the message itself, or you can get them on YouTube where you just get the message again. There are various ways of doing it. And if you want to be in our mailing list, you just fill in the blue card and you can put it in the plate or any way that you like to do that. So we're looking at the idea of creating space. And in the first week, we looked at the idea that space includes not only shape, not only volume, it also includes time, which I thought was interesting. Shape does include space does include time. If you think about it, when you measure the journey to a star, you measure it in light years, so the space is actually measured in time. But it's also space is a generative and creative quality. It has a generative and creative quality, and it's not just a void. It has there's a potentiality in space for something to happen. Its space is the nothing that contains the possibility for something not yet there. And then we looked at the idea of creating space for someone is an act of love. You do that. We have definition of love here, which is giving with no expectation of return. And when you create space for someone, you give it with no expectation of return. You do it as an act of love. When we surrender, as Heather was talking, to that divine within us, and we create a space for others, the character of that space that we create is a loving character. And I think for me that is the starting point for creating space for others. Because it's not controlling, it's giving. And it's then that we're able to use, once we've given that space, this is like previously on, I'm just giving you what we did over the last 7 weeks. It's then that we were able to go inside ourselves and look for whatever intuitive response we want to make within that space. Because you can't just say, here's the space, there's a response as well. There are ways, you don't just, if someone is a drug addict, you don't just say, when they say I'd like something, don't just give them drugs. You create a space whereby they can heal. So there is something that needs to be done in the creation of the space. And when you do that, you actually can draw from within to be guided as to what to do. We're guided by that divine that's within us as to how to act. And so, we draw on that inner guidance to bring out the wisdom that's needed in any situation that we're speaking into. And you need that guidance, it's something that comes from the heart. We draw, we had that whole analogy about the sword in the stone, which is like drawing the truth out, change from hearts of stone to hearts of flesh. We draw out that truth that's within us and we speak it into those different sets of circumstances. Then we looked at the idea that enlightenment, there's a simple form of enlightenment, which is just existing in the present moment, allowing that joy that's within us to well up and to share that present moment with others who are around us. And then we confronted the idea of the turbulence that's always is in the world at the moment, and the need to be still, need to be the eye of the storm, or the still place in a turning world. And last week we approached the idea that, in facing the future, we had to see that when we confront difficulties in our lives, we have to remember that sort of phrase that the extent of our realization, the extent of our enlightenment will only become known. How clear we are will only become known when we have difficult circumstances. Only in the difficult circumstances will we know where we are at in our spirituality with our practice. And also we looked at the idea last week that our role is really to serve others, to serve those who are in need, to create, especially in this time, to create safe places for those who are going to find the next period of time in our country difficult. We talked about the idea of creating circles of care to come around those who might be suffering. It could be undocumented people, or those suffering from some sort of discrimination or losing their benefits, those who are simply depressed. We create spaces for people to find some form of sanctuary when they get into difficulty. And today, just to finish, I want to talk about that concept of sanctuary. Sanctuary is from the Latin word sanctus, which means a holy thing. A sanctuary is a space set apart for holiness, for the divine to come in and to create harmony and healing. This room is called the sanctuary. We always refer to this room as the sanctuary of the Aspen Chapel. And I sometimes think if we were going to change the name of the Aspen Chapel, I'd want to change it to the Aspen Sanctuary. But that's another conversation. But I think sanctuary, the concept of sanctuary, is important at this time. It's the perfect end to a series on creating spaces because sanctuary is the ultimate space that we want to create. A space for the divine to come and enter in with all the healing and the creation of harmony that it can bring about. It's also important because obviously sanctuary has a meaning in church history. Since the time of Constantine and, by medieval law, fugitives or debtors enjoyed immunity from arrest and the ordinary operations of the law in certain churches. There's a sense of a place of refuge or protection. And I think that's also going to become increasingly important as we're faced with the possibility of undocumented people maybe having nowhere to go. And I think this is going to become an issue for many churches up and down the land. And I think we as a community need to prepare for the possibility of that becoming an issue for us. But in the broader sense, the creation of a space for the divine to live, a holy place, is also relevant to both our inner work, the work we do on ourselves, and our outer work. Prayer and meditation and study, that is the inner work. And we need to do that to create the space for the divine to live within us. We have to have that sanctuary within us. Most of us here admit that divine nature a bit, but our minds very much like to stay in control. We invite God or the divine in really as a lodger rather than as a participating member of the family. We say, yes, I know you're real. Come and live in that small room at the attic at the top of the house, and I'll come and visit you once a week, unless I have family commitments or there's a powder day, or it's spring break, when I might not be able to come, unfortunately. In the meantime, please don't come into all the other rooms. Rest assured, I will be thinking of you, and I may even ask you to help me when I'm in trouble. In those instances, I will call you up on the intercom, and you can come and do the best you can to help me. If it's a dire emergency, I may even invite you to come into the living room and be with me for a bit. But when it's over, I will expect you to go back to your room and stay there. I will be able to handle it from that moment on. It's very different from sharing one's life, the house, with God. That cosmic hospitality. Come, live with me. Have the biggest room in the house, the biggest bedroom. Would you like to redecorate? When would you like your meals? How can I change the house to suit you? Genuinely living together. To have that sort of friendship with the divine is what it is to practice cosmic hospitality. And our role is to host the divine within us. And it's not that difficult. Because, believe it or not, the divine is already living within us. And if it isn't, you'd be dead. It's always living within us. It's what gives us our life. And we have to be accustomed to this house guest, as you were saying. We have to become accustomed to this house guest rather than just ignoring it and thinking that we can do it on our own. And for us to do that, we have to have that age-old journey that we all have to travel. And that age-old journey is traveling from our heads to our hearts. That's the journey that we have to travel. The head wants, our minds want to be in control, and they will dominate and control the circumstances. But we have to move into our hearts. Our minds want to survive, and they're more interested in that than they are in paying attention to some nebulous reality that may or may not exist within us. So we have to stop our minds and listen to our hearts, which is why we do meditation. I'm big on meditation here. I will always be saying, get your practice. If you haven't got a practice, come and see me, because it is the foundation of it. Rowan Williams, who is the previous Archbishop of Canterbury, I always like to quote him. He says, to put it boldly, meditation is the only ultimate answer to the unreal and insane world that our financial systems and our advertising culture and our chaotic, unexamined emotions encourage us to inhabit. He said, to learn meditative practice is to learn what we need so as to live truthfully, honestly, and lovingly. It is a deeply revolutionary matter. And that is because it turns us from the insane world that the mind witnesses and takes us to the inner world in order to make that deep friendship with the source of our being. And I think the key words in that quote are to live truthfully, honestly, and lovingly, which is really what we want to do. When we make house room in our hearts for God, we turn ourselves into loving human beings. And in this loving act, there is no expectation of a return. We become love. We become one with the divine within us, and we enter into the sacredness of the present moment. And it's loving because we remember what we said last week, James Finley's famous phrase, that God protects us from nothing, but sustains us in all things. God protects us from, and we know that in our hearts. He's not going to stop you getting cancer. God protects us from nothing, and yet sustains us somehow through all things. And we also know that. We've got through to here. We've been sustained through all things, and we will continue to be sustained through all things. And this loving act that has no expectation of return, we become love, and we become one with the divine within us, and we enter into the sacredness of the present moment. That's where this takes us, always, into the sacredness of the present moment, which Thich Nhat Hanh said, your true home is the present moment. I think it's just a lovely concept. Your true home is the present. And we don't want to be here. We've got our book club, actually. We're doing Ram Dash's Be Here Now, which is a throwback to another age. That's our book club. But, it's always been about that. It has been about that, but we always take ourselves away from it. We think there's some better place to be, which is normally in our minds. Better place than the present moment. And as we make that sanctuary within us, the divine shows us how to live in that true home. And we can therefore practice cosmic hospitality. Cosmic hospitality ends up with us living in the present moment. This is where joy comes from. This is where love comes from, the present moment. And we then are at the point, it's only then we're really at the point where we can invite our neighbour in and love our neighbour in the same way that we are loving ourselves, by loving God. That's what Jesus meant when he said, love your neighbour as yourself. And that's how we begin, by creating sanctuary or holiness within, and then we can go out and offer sanctuary to those around us. We create a place of holiness and safety for those around us to come into. And for us to do that can be both a challenging and a vulnerable place, when we make ourselves vulnerable. In talking about enlightenment, Kawan Yamada says, no matter how wonderful the initial experience of seeing through the distinction of self and other is, if we're still unable to live the life where self and other are one, then awakening has not been personalized and our character will remain much as it was before the experience. In other words, having had some great experience, if we still continue to live in the place where we consider ourselves separate from everybody, if we continue to do that, it hasn't really had any effect. If we cannot feel others, he says, others' sadness as our own, and rejoice in their good fortune, if we are unable to live the reality where self-gain and altruism are the same, then we have not embodied the world where self and other are one. He's saying that unless you can embody the place where self-gain and altruism are one, unless you can do that, you're not living in a unity of consciousness. You're not living in that enlightened state. To live the reality where self-gain and altruism are the same. That is what we aim for. Not our own enlightenment, but that those around us may find sanctuary, where self-gain and altruism are one. It's a fantastic concept. It's nothing new. To give is to receive, do unto... endless stuff in sacred scriptures, all over all the religions. But to have a perspective where self-gain and altruism are one is so clear. If we can grasp that self-gain comes from the practice of disinterested and selfless concern, that's the definition of altruism, disinterested and selfless concern for the well-being of others. If we can grasp that, in other words, the loving concern, a concern with no expectation of return, if we can grasp that, then we can have self-gain and altruism become together. And it is this that is involved in the creating sanctuary for others. It means that the focus is not on our own enlightenment, but on the enlightenment of others. And that's quite freeing. In the spiritual life, especially, in our area, you always want to get something. Consumer spirituality. I want to get enlightened. I want to get this. I want to get that. That's not really, that's about level 4 of 10. When you really get to the other end, it is all about service. In Mayan Buddhism, the ideal is the bodhisattva, an enlightened being who chooses to be reborn to help others attain enlightenment. And that's really what's required of us, I think, at this time. And the first step on that way is to provide for others who are in need, to be focused not only on the creation of sanctuary within ourselves, but also creating a space for sanctuary for others. Whatever that might mean. To create sanctuary for others is both a personal and it's a corporate thing. On a personal level, we create, when we create space to listen to people, whether it be family or friends. That is creating sanctuary, a safe space to be heard. Or maybe, inviting people into our homes for a meal. That is giving them sanctuary. When people are in need of hospitality, or formal spaces where there are groups of people that are in need, and we can help them on a personal level. And also on a corporate level, for us to come together collectively and work for those who need help that goes beyond something that one person can offer. To be in the spiritual business, and all of us here actually are in the business, in the occupation of spirituality, just by being here, you are in that business, is to be in the business of creating sanctuary, in the business of creating house room for God, both for ourselves and for those we come into contact with. It's the ultimate end of creating space. And it's the reason that we create space for others. Not that we can make a difference, but that the harmony that's in the center of all things may be able to create its own harmony through us. That's really all we're asking. We're not controlling it. We're opening ourselves to something that's within us and allowing that to come out. It's why Jesus threw those money changers out of the temple. My house shall be called a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of robbers. We have a chance, I think, in creating sanctuary for those in need over the next period of time. And I really would encourage us to take that opportunity as it comes along. Love that soulfulness in that. It's fantastic. So, listen, we always have an opportunity for you to come back at us as anything that's happened or said during the service or anything not related to that, to either agree, disagree, share an experience or anything like that. Always really welcome that. It's not necessary for anybody to say anything. We might just enjoy some silence if nobody wants to say anything. But just like to invite, yeah, John, fantastic. Why don't you kick us off?
Good morning. I'm John Bachram, and this is my wife, Liz. And we've been joyous members of this congregation for over 30 years. And I wanted to thank Heather and Nicholas for the series on space, and that I was able to finally associate time to space. A reminder to all that it could be seconds, for those of you that keep yourselves busy 18 hours a day, and it could be eternity, and my hope is that the universe would be eternity, and that I'm living somewhere in between. I'm trying for space in hours and days and weeks, and that's sort of my reality. Realizing that I lived in the attic in the 60s. I was in the attic, and my parents put us there intentionally. It created space, it created privacy, it created independency. And that's why I'm still a very independent individual today, because I lived in the attic. But in terms of space, recently I had a huge success with some space. I'll give you a timeline on it. It was a few weeks, which is a long time for me. And the success of that was that it allowed growth and forgiveness during that space. I recently closed that space, i.e. yesterday, and really learned a lot from it. So thank you, Nicholas and Heather.
Thank you very much, John. Lovely. Appreciate that. Anybody else like to? Yes, there we are. Welcome back. Lovely to have you there. Fantastic.
I just want to say how wonderful it is to be back.
Yeah.
Because we were in California and I could have stayed there. I was really very happy in the summer of California. And you guys really drew me back, and this place and the sanctuary. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So appreciate that. Good. Anybody else like to say anything at all? There we are. Fantastic. And lovely to have you with us. Thank you.
My name's Carol. This is my husband, Tim, and this is our first time. I think you came last Christmas Eve. once. Yeah. So anyway, thank you for this beautiful, you can feel the sanctuary here. And we are really in a process of shifting because of the world's shifted so much. We decided to shift where we worship and where we call sanctuary. So this feels very safe. Thank you for that. And the fact that you've called us to create safety for others is just, I might tear up on that one. I always ask God for a sign, and when you started talking about creating space, I'm writing a book, and I have a chapter called Creating Space. And then I've had this beautiful moment with God at an earlier point in my life where he specifically said, I'm calling you to create safe space for others. So I just want to thank you for that magnificent sign.
Thank
I
you.
just needed to speak up about that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So appreciate it. Dan.
Good morning, everybody. I was just thinking about what you were saying there, creating space for others really is maybe taking a break from talking and just letting them be, and whatever they have to say, you don't need to say, oh, I did this, or you should do that, but just actually listening. And I was thinking that in this day of busyness and noise and overstimulation, that actually being there and actively listening, not waiting for your time to talk, is a profound act of love. And you might notice that the people that actually listen to you, you feel a strong connection with them because they're allowing you to have that space to be yourself, no matter what you say.
Such good advice at the week of Thanksgiving. Thank you. Appreciate that. Anybody else?